Our reading today is Psalm 23. You'll find it on page 388 in your Pew Bible. A Psalm of David. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside waters of rest. He restores my life. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Only goodness and kindness shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord for length of days.
Friends, will you pray with me? And as you feel so familiar and comfortable, I invite you to join in the second time through. Let the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, O God. Let the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, O God. Amen. I think maybe the ragweed is out. I'm seeing lots of moths. It's that time of year. Some of my greatest memories, most cherished memories from my childhood were times that I spent at my grandparents' house in East Vassaboro, Maine. It's a very tiny town. Most people, if they're not familiar with Maine but have listened to the comedian Bert and I, might recognize the town because he does do one little joke about how to get to East Vassaboro. Ken, you'll have to do a little impression of Bert and I after worship. But in my grandparents' somewhat run-down 20s craftsman-style home, we had many family dinners and gatherings. My mom is, if you ever talk to her, you know she has 6 brothers, so she's one of 7. My grandfather is one of 12, many of whom still lived in East Vassaboro, so he's born and raised in East Vassaboro. Although he did come over this area of the country post-World War II, so they were Quaker, and so he was a conscientious objector and built fire towers during the war. After the war, he worked at what is now the Brattleboro Retreat, which was a hospital caring for wounded service members. So he worked not too far away in Brattleboro. But in their house, I remember certain details really well. I remember the plastic curtain and drape in between the walls and the opening between the sort of the dining room and the living room that nobody actually ever sat in. But it was cold. So that would keep the heat in where people were actually seating. I also remember that in that living room, up in the front corner, there was a stain on the wallpaper from when there was bees had built a hive in the wall. And somebody had come and removed the bees or sprayed them or something. And so, you don't know this about bees. If you have a hive, don't just remove them because they keep the honey cool and solid. And if you get rid of the bees, the honey just drips. And so for years there was this stain on the corner of that wall from the honey of those bees. But what I most loved about this house was not the house at all, but the fact that you walked out of the house and walked right across the road and were on the banks of China Lake. China Lake was not a swimming lake, at least not that section, because it was a reservoir of drinking water. But people fished in it, and I just liked to go out, climb on the rocks that were alongside, and just look at the water. And I remember very clearly that there were often summer days when you'd get up early in the morning, and you'd look out, and the water would be totally still. Not a movement, not a bird, just a perfect reflection of the trees alongside the edges of the lake, of the farmhouse, a reflection of the farmhouse where my grandfather grew up, which was right on the water down the road. And it just made your whole body slow down. So I think very much of that water and that lake when I read this psalm now. You noticed, for those of you who may have this memorized or some version of this memorized, that some of the phrasing seemed a little different. I chose today to share the version using the footnotes. So if you look in your Pew Bible, you'll notice some of the ones. And one of them is that still waters might also be translated as waters of rest. And I love that. Because don't we all need that nowadays? And it turns out that there is actually some scientific backing for this sense of water and rest. It's called the blue mind theory. At least that's what they're calling it now. Marine biologist Dr. Wallace Nichols published a book in 2014 called Blue Mind. And the idea is that being near or in water triggers positive response in our brain. And his theory is that because we are mostly composed of water, our brains look at water and think, I'm in the right place. He doesn't use this language as far as I know, but I might think even that we feel a kinship with the water. That is family, that is belonging that we notice. And physiologically, our blood pressure lowers, our respiration slows, and the stress chemicals in our brain also decrease. And it allows us all kinds of positive benefits, better problem solving, more openness to creativity, a calmer nervous system. So this idea, and I love this when we start saying, scientists approve, and we go, David, back literally thousands of years ago, wrote about the rest found beside water and attributed it to God. That this is what God leads us to. God says, come, be by the water, have rest, have nourishment, be restored. Because certainly David in his life and his many responsibilities and drama that he was involved in needed moments of rest. We can imagine that David's life was probably fairly stressful at many times. And yet he felt very much that God called him to rest by water and stillness. So I want to invite you this week, first of all, to read this psalm or recite it to yourself if you know it. few times. I know many love it in the King James Version. You're certainly welcome to do that. You might find alternate versions if you want. And just take the time to slowly go through these words, this song that David gave us. And then find water somehow. It could be a bath. It could be a cup of water. It might be Norway Pond. If we get some rain this week, it might be a puddle. Just somehow draw yourself near to water. You could even get in the water. That has benefits too. Or on top of the water if you kayak or canoe or paddleboard. But just bring yourself near water. Feel the relaxing and restful effects of that water. And open yourself up to God's presence. Perhaps you might offer a prayer of gratitude for the water, which in this area of the country, even when we are in drought, is fairly abundant and clean. You might offer gratitude for a chance, even just a moment to rest, like we do in the term centering, to sort of put aside the to-do lists and the anxieties of the moment and just be by the water and feel your soul and your life be restored to you. And feel the kinship and conversation of the water swirling around in your own body with the water that is visible or tangible. You can touch the water if you're not